Who's Dr. Stinky McDougal?
You mean the legend?
He's a real buckaroo bonsai kind of guy.
I watched him dice a guy into pieces with 6 f***ing words.
Stinky's the most inconvenient man in most rooms.
He's a master of drunk boxing.
Every time Stinky calls, my blood pressure skyrockets!
I heard he's staging an evolution.
Dr. Stinky McDougal says the difference between a revolution and an evolution is the conscious choice not to break everything in the transition.
And now, broadcasting from the borderless territory of Liberty Valley, Minnesota, here's your host, Dr. Stinky McDougal! Shake it, baby!
It's interesting. So here's the distinction that I make in my mind, and it's between people who are participating in occult practices and have no idea that they are.
Right.
You know, people who are, participating in abortion and don't see it, don't understand it as what it is, which is a child sacrifice ritual as old as Canaan, who are using hallucinogenic drugs, which are clearly a portal for demonic possession.
Sure.
Welcome, everybody, to the Dr. Stinky McDougal podcast. Our guest today is Marco Visconti, and Marco is an author, he's an occult educator, and a lifetime student of what's called the Western Esoteric Tradition. Marco is a follower of what's known as Thelema, and we'll get into talking about that because that relates back to Aleister Crowley and his philosophy around the nature of magic itself. Marco has been an educator of the occult and of ritual magic for the last 3 decades or so. And he comes to us today from England, which is really cool. And the reason we're doing this podcast is that I am actually out in Joshua Tree, California at the Stairway to Heaven conference with Peter Levenda, which has just been an absolute treat. And Marco has joined us and has been an educator online, doing it remote. And it was a great time for that to happen because right about a week ago, Tucker Carlson put out an interview with a gentleman by the name of Greg Olson. And Greg Olson makes several statements along with Tucker about things like the satanic nature of occult magic and about how, one is that psychedelics are a doorway for Satan to enter your life. And it was so overstated and so large a statement that I thought, for the sake of the people who follow the Dr. Stinky McDougal podcast, it would be good to introduce people to what ritual magic is and to the occult from someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Because when I look at this from the standpoint of it's a technology. It's a technology that's already being employed. It's a technology that is already being used. And what we don't understand is what that means and why it's so important. So, Mr. Visconti, Marco, may I call you Marco?
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
Thank you. Welcome to the show.
You.
Marco, why don't you start by telling us, how did you get into ritual magic and what have you gleaned from 10,000 feet?
So, it was something that attracted me from a very early age. And I guess it was around like my early teens that as I was, discovering high strangeness, if we want to use that term, I was reading multiple things, especially, in Italy, we have this, this comic book, and this comic titled Martin Myster. And Martin Myster is kind of like an Indiana Jones, but with a more of an occult, high strangeness vibe about him. And amongst the various stories, there was like one day, I remember it was the summer of 1990. So what's that, like 35 years ago? There was like almost like a zoning in on a specific character, and the character was Aleister Crowley. And I got very curious about this guy, right? It seemed like a cool guy. I was just a little bit context for your listeners. I'm from Rome. I live in London, UK, but I'm from Rome, Italy. I was coming out of a very Christian Catholic background. My family wasn't particularly religious, but everything in Italy, especially in the back day,
especially in Rome.
Especially in Rome. I was baptized in St. Peter's Basilica by the Pope. Just to give you an idea, right? So, and as I said multiple times in other interviews, it's not such a strange thing. There's like, you can, if you know that your child is going to be baptized, you put it on a list. That was back in the days, right? It was like 47 years ago. I don't know if they still do it, but it was not such an uncommon thing back then. But still, just to give you an idea. And as I said, even if my family wasn't religious, I was still getting baptized because that's the right thing to do when you live in a very strict Catholic background. However, I didn't really care about it. I grew up very early. I started to have different ideas, different interests, different interests, especially in the realm of religious and religious feelings. Okay. So lo and behold, when I'm 12, I found this character called Aleister Crowley. At first, I didn't realize it was a real person because I thought it must be another character in this in the comic book arc. But no, it was a real character. Of course, it was a real person. And ever since, I got interested in what he had to say, and immediately I realized that even though as a very young man, as a child really, almost was 18, I realized that there was a lot of misconceptions around the message of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, the man, was definitely somebody who had a very colorful life, ups and lows. He was definitely a libertine. He was definitely somebody who, an Epicurean, maybe when you use the term, and definitely somebody who, coming from an incredible amount of privilege, Crowley inherited more or less the amount of £6 million. So it's like almost $10 million by the time he was 18. So coming from an incredible amount of privilege, he was often very, very nasty with the people around him. Like he thought of himself a bit of above the ground. And yet, at the same time, he pursued a life in service of seeking for truth, with capital T and all of that. And again, like when you start to differentiate the aura of the man Crowley with the message that Crowley was pushing through, which is Thelema, and Thelema is a Greek word for will. So the idea of like finding what is the will that sets your orbit on this incarnation, then you realize that the two messages are very different. Like whatever Crowley embodied as a man can be liked, can be disliked, but the message of Thelema is one of fundamental discipline and fundamental service in pursuit of the higher truth. And I realized it as a young teen, and I was like, yeah, sign me up. Pretty much that's been my life ever since. So yeah.
You share the introduction to Thelema and magic with Peter in that both of you came to it at a very young age. Do you think that there is a degree of being called to something like that at such a young age, or how does one become approachable for this subject?
I do believe that those who are meant to, engage with these practices, with these philosophies, with these religions, I do believe there's a degree of being called, like you are born into this life. Okay. I have no proof of that. When we speak about magic, when we speak of religion, when we speak of everything that's super rational, we can try and find reasons as to why this happened. But as I said, all these experiences pertain to the supra-rational. I don't call it supernatural because I think everything we experience is natural. Like it's part of our...
It's all natural. It's just question of how we recognize how large that nature is.
And I think that what happens there is that we tend to try and make sense of nature by boxing nature into categories, and those categories pertain to the rational side of our brain, of our mind, of our soul. Well, there's also what's said. There's also something super rational, right? And we still have to contend with that. And so I do believe that being called to this life and these practices, it's something that just happens, and we cannot really explain why it does, right? And I've seen it because over the last, what is now like 5 years that I've been more of a public-facing occultist, if you want. And so I became almost like a public-facing teacher. I was doing this privately earlier on. I realized that a lot of folks have a curiosity for this, but very few stick to it. Like I always like to say to the students that come to me and say, hey, give me 6 months of your time, right? In this 6 months, you try this. If you don't like it by the end, if you don't find joy in doing these practices, in reading this text, in engaging with this zeitgeist, with this view of the world, then it's not for you, and it's absolutely fine. It's not that you're worse off for it. Maybe in many ways you're gonna go and live a much relaxed life, as opposed of like trying to make sense of something that it kind of escape the human brain ability to box it, and so from time to time that generates a little bit of strong feelings. Let's put it like that.
One of the things that I find interesting is that there is a public perception that there is a large degree of danger to ritual magic, to the idea of magic. But it occurred to me, as I researched it more and sort of put it in its proper context, look, people go to church every week and they take a piece of bread they transform into body. They take a wine that they transform into blood. Is that not in and of itself a type of ritual magic?
100%. I mean, I would argue that the religious rituals of high church, be it Catholic or be it Orthodox, it is ritual magic through and through. Like the very concept of ritual magic stems from the 17th and 18th centuries, when in fact what was happening is that it was starting to become easier for people with this interest to congregate together, because we had the Age of Enlightenment. They were not, you didn't really risk to be burned at the stake for it anymore, right?
Yeah, we had to kind of get over the idea of burning people for ideas that didn't fit.
And so, these people were starting to congregate in rooms, in halls, in lodges, and what they really did to create their rituals, well, they look back at the church, they look back at the Vatican, they look back at the Orthodox synods, and were like, what do they do? How do they do this thing? They studied how ritual work, the stages of it, and then they kind of recreated it. The rituals of Freemasonry are in many ways recreations of high church ritual. I would argue also another kind of rituals and I'm referring, for instance, to the rituals of the Crown here in the UK. I don't know if maybe for some of your listeners, maybe you as well, you will remember when the Queen Elizabeth II died a few years ago, they televised all the ritual of the funeral and whatnot, and then they televised the rituals of the enthronement of King Charles, right? Well, as a Freemason, I was like, oh, look at that. There's a lot of things that happen in a Freemason lodge that are incredibly similar to that. And of course, those rituals, the rituals of the Crown, came before Freemasonry. So you would say like, well, maybe Freemasonry and the rituals of Freemasonry informed that. No, it's kind of the opposite, I think, right? Like humanity likes ritual because, ritual help exteriorize processes that happen inside of us. And as I said yesterday at the Stairway to Heaven lecture, for those of you who weren't there, I'm sorry. You don't know exactly what happened.
I'm sorry too. Y'all should have been there. This has been a great conference.
Basically, like I was saying yesterday, right? Like humanity always starts with rituals in the outer, right? Getting props, getting incenses, so smells and visual cues and whatnot. But all those rituals in the outer really are a reflection of processes that happen inside of us, and eventually you move from that ritual setting into something deeper, and then from there you move somewhere else, but that's for another day, I suppose.
Yeah, talking about the ritual of installing a new king in England, just so that people kind of get a sense of how much ritual magic is around us that we don't recognize. One of the items that they utilize is a chair. Right? There's a special chair that the kings are installed on. Can you start just kind of share, if you will, why a chair? Why a special chair? Is there something about that chair that makes it special?
Well, in my understanding, that chair represents the throne of God, right? So that the idea is that like all props in a ritual magical setting, they all correspondences of something else, right? And in this case, the chair, the throne, represents again the throne of God, and so in many ways, the king is ascended and enthroned as a way to suggest the idea that he is becoming like God. He is in fact receiving the afflatus, the pneuma, the spirit of God himself, by doing an action that is similar to what we perceive in our monkey brains, that if God was really like a guy with a flowing bird would do. Of course, it's not like that, right? But again, by correspondence, by sympathetic links, we can actually suggest to our inner brain some connections, and then we can find, and that's where the magic happens, pretty much.
There's a similar chair, if I read it correctly, at the Vatican. I don't mean so much that they were designed the same, but that has the same ritual purpose. Is that another indication that the Catholic Church, the Pope, is engaging in that same type of seat of God?
I would say that you find this in Freemasonic lodge as well, like the installing of a new worshipful master. There's always this idea, like everywhere you see a system of hierarchy with a figure that becomes the king, the pope, the master. There are similar rituals of enthronement, because again, it's the idea behind it is becoming like God and doing what God would do in order to obtain power and authority over whatever you are set to control. The king over the land, the pope over the church, the worship master over his lodge. So that is it, right? I wouldn't look so much into, I mean, as much as I know, I might not know things, but I wouldn't look so much into, similar chair. There's a lot of, like, from time to time on the internet you see, oh look, there's the same symbols there. There's, like, I don't know, 3 crosses and 4. It's not really that. It's the chair. It's the archetype of it, the throne, right? And I mean, like, we've been looking at this with the concept of celestial ascent. And ascending where? Through the throne of God, right? Same idea.
So if we begin with the idea that the royal family is doing magic, the churches are doing magic, the Freemasons are doing magic, how much of what we see around us, in terms of corporations and universities and scientists and this, how much has magic infiltrated those areas that we don't recognize, do you think?
I wouldn't use the term infiltrated. I would say that magic is one of the 4 ways that humanity interface with the world around us, right? And the other 3 ways are science, religion, and art. And I'm using this fourfold schema from Ramsay Duke's seminal book, SSOTBME. That's really the title, SSOTBME, which, if I'm not mistaken, means Sex Secrets of the Black Magicians Exposed. But it has nothing to do with sex, has nothing to do with the Black Magicians. Ramsay Dukes is one of the finest minds in magic. He's an older man now. He must be pushing 80s, actually. He lives in South Africa, and he's from England originally. And that book, like I said, the title is willfully tongue-in-cheek, but it really is an essay on what magic is and how magic is. Like I said, it's one of these 4 ways that humanity interfaces with reality. And by doing that, like, you can choose one of these modalities to achieve whatever results you want to achieve. If you want to create something, that is, I don't know, something where people that hinges on people beliefs, you will use a religious modality. If you want to try and modify reality with subtler terms, you use a magical operation. Science, of course, we are using right now to Zoom, right? Thanks to Zoom, right now we can actually talk thousands of miles apart. Instead, we would have to, if we didn't have Zoom, maybe we would have to scry, and try to get, a mental connection via magical means. And I would say also art is the another very important aspect, because art, again, allows humanity to tap onto all those supra-rational qualities like intuition, emotion, that actually can help us, unlock problems in our life, or even let's keep it simple. We could go on forever. But back to what you're asking, I don't think that magic has infiltrated it. I think that corporations, universities, like every big group of people, especially every big group of people commands money and influence, will use magical means either willingly or unknowingly, because from time to time magical modalities just seep into the way we do things. I really, when we look back at writers like Peter Carroll, Ray Sherwin, which were these, again, British writers at the turn of the 70s into the 80s that pretty much started this magical current called chaos magic. They would infer a lot that, if we look at the Coca-Cola logo or the McDonald's logo, those are in fact sigils, right? And that sigil is a artistic representation of a magical intent. So again, you're starting to mix just two of those two modalities. So that's nothing religious here. You don't try, you do not worship at the Coca-Cola church, I hope. There's not much science involved into this. It's just that it's an artistic logo that could it be that behind that logo there's a magical will? Possibly. But was it done willfully? Was there a Coca-Cola magician behind it all, like Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin and others?
The question of how much occultism is occurring in those type of things.
Yeah.
One of those in America that we get is the Amazon logo, which has a phallic symbol in it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just ordered something from Amazon. I don't see it, but I know maybe. I really think, and I say this because having been part of this milieu for the best part of my life, but let's say more of an active, like I said, outward phase in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, you'll be surprised how a lot of conspiracy theorists that wants to see magic operators, magicians everywhere, they would be really, depressed if they actually spent one afternoon in a magical lodge. There's not that much, right, of strange fingers behind, in all pies, at least in the magical lodges that are more outwardly so. Could it be that there is something more hidden? Very, very likely. I mean, as we all know, the U.S. government has fiddled with magic since the 40s. You think about MK Ultra, Project Blue Book, all those strange CIA, FBI projects that we know they existed right now, and we know they were trying to pretty much weaponize magic, right? But is it done willingly? I don't know. I don't have much evidence of that, right? Which is also funny when I then see people like maybe our friend Tucker Carlson that just starts going nuts about it because I don't know, my friend.
Well, and he comes from a very Christian background, and of course, when I look at history, especially for example the history of Europe, right? So the Roman Church would just encompass people into their religion would just become fine. You can keep your religion; you're just going to become part of the Roman Empire. But when the Roman Empire became the Roman Catholic Empire, they began, defeating and removing those what they would consider heretical practices around the empire, and just stamp out any ritual magic that really existed, which continued in secret societies because that would be the one way that they could exist. And so if you look at that, down the road, there's a video out there, for example, and this is one of the things people go, this is why you don't do it. There's a video purportedly at the CERN, super collider of a human sacrifice, right? I mean, if there are those who want to become involved in understanding this, do we have to accept that human sacrifice is part of this?
I mean, was it a real human sacrifice or was it a mock human sacrifice?
And that's what we don't know. You bring up a good question. Is it required to be real in order to be effective?
Okay, very good question here. So first of all, I don't have any evidence that you have to spill the blood of a human being or even of an animal to use magical practices of any kind. You don't need that, okay? But it's also undeniably true that the concept of sacrifice, like sacrifice comes from Latin, sacer fire, to make it sacred, okay? And this is, the idea is that what is the most precious thing that you can make sacred? It is human life, right? So if your idea is that you want to try and appeal to the highest authority, then that is the final, the end of the goal, like the end of the line, like that you will have to go to that length. Do you need it? No, you don't. Like, it's almost like most of the times, in fact, in every instance of magical operation that I've ever seen in my life, that would be like, using a nuclear bomb to mow your lawn, right? That's not it. Like, that's too much. When we look back, for instance, at the Bible, right? When is that God asked, was it Jacob to kill his son? It was only to test Abraham, sorry.
Sacrificing his son on the altar.
So it's only to test his loyalty. And then he stays his hand, right? Because like, no. Like, it's like, you don't need to deploy the nuclear option, even if that is an option. But it's almost something that, like I said, in my understanding, I've never seen the need for that in anything you need. In fact, right, like there are some sort of like sacrifices. I mean, sacrifice, it's used a lot in various religions. I'm thinking about African diaspora religions like voodoo or candomblé. And again, usually it is a chicken or an animal, because you want to show the dedication to, in this case, the laws or the rishas, which are the spirits pertaining to those traditions. And those spirits do like the sacrifice of an animal. But again, there's no need for anything more than that. And even then, I would say it is rare, and it is something that's used when you really need to deploy the nuclear option.
We say that it's rare, but interestingly enough, years ago I read a book called "Living the Year Biblically." I believe that's what it was called, something similar to that. And it was done by a gentleman who was Jewish, and what he was going to do is he was going to take 1 year and follow every law written in the Torah. And one of the rituals that they perform once a year is a chicken sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So you go, and they actually provide you a chicken. They provide you the environment. You slaughter the chicken, and then the chickens, of course, are then given to charity so that they can feed people, which seemed doubly odd to me at the moment. But is ritual sacrifice then that rare if there's an entire religion of Judaism who has a sect who still practice animal sacrifice?
Well, I think that we come from a different perspective, in the sense that I don't find it odd at all. In the sense that in my worldview, sacrificing a chicken once a year to reestablish the covenant with your God, and I'm not Jewish, by the way, but I know of the practice, that's okay, right? Especially if you try to sacrifice the animal in a humane way. Of course, you don't go there and you try to avoid all sorts of suffering to the animal. Well, what you're doing is that, I mean, think about it. Like when we're talking about chicken, right? Look at how chicken are harvested by the meat industry. That is way worse and way more inhumane and evil, if we want to use that term, than getting a chicken, loving the chicken, and then slaughtering humanely once a year to reestablish a covenant with your God. I don't find it odd at all. But then again, I mean, I come from a more bizarre background, I suppose.
When we talk about bizarre practices, one of the practices of Aleister Crowley was the consumption of blood, and actually the consumption of feces. There was an individual who actually died from dysentery, but this was during a time when he was, I believe, in Italy, wasn't he? And they were really diving deep into some of these practices.
On one note, I'm I'm gonna stop you for a second. The guy who died of dysentery, it was one of his students, and he died of dysentery because not because he ate fluids or feces or anything, because he drank from a fountain where the water was not potable. And Crowley actually warned him, like, you can drink from everywhere, not from there. The guy forgot, drank from there, he was dead. This is a very important thing. I can refer you or your listeners to Perdurabo by Richard Kaczynski. It is a massive biography. It's academically sourced, so people can find the references. But this is important to say because it is definitely true that during the time of the Abbey of Thelema, it was pretty much like a proto-hippie commune that Crowley put together in Cefalù, Sicily, between 1920 and 1923. And it is absolutely true that he was living there a very libertine lifestyle with his partner, Leah Herzig, also known as Sora Alostrel, and a revolving door of other students, partners. Like I said, they were living a very Epicurean, libertine life. It is also true that they were living they were very filthy. And this is because they didn't care. Like they were trying to experience what it was to live in a different way. Crowley was always incredibly scientific in his approach to magic. Like he was always trying things and then writing them down and say, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, this didn't work. Including the case of scatology that you just mentioned. Like it is true. Like I cannot deny it. It is in the diaries. So that there was a time where he tried to consume Mandarin meals, as he calls them, and he was repulsed by it, as obviously. But Crowley's approach was always one. And again, this is one of the reasons why I always liked him, because it's like I'm gonna try everything once. Maybe not never, and maybe never more, right? But I'm gonna try because I'm not going to. I'm talking about Crowley's mindset. Like it was like I'm not gonna trust your word on that. I don't personally agree with it 100% because I guess we both can know already that eating feces is not a great idea. So I will not do it, right?
What? I shouldn't eat shit and die.
Exactly. But again, like if we look at Crowley, he was approaching this with what he used to call it scientific illuminism. That is, the method of science and the aim of religion. The aim of religion trying to find ways towards the experience of the divine using the method of science. That is the trial and error. Like let's test methods. Let's see what works. Let's see what doesn't work. Let's see if something works for me, doesn't work for you. Let's see if this is repeatable, right? I mean, yes, we have to accept that at some point that included eating feces. I mean, he did it, so we don't have to do it.
Thank you very much for that sacrifice. Interestingly enough, as we're talking about the years that Crowley was doing this, 1920 to 1923, it sort of brings to mind also these formative years of the Nazi Party in Germany, literally just around the corner, also playing with magic. Do you have any sense of whether these were the phenomenon itself, expressing twice, or is there a single activity growing magic in the world at the time? What is this ageist during this age of magic being practiced both for political and for personal freedom?
I think that humanity goes through phases, right? And I think, by the way, I also think those phases are accelerating. But accepting this idea of repeating phases, and one of these phases is, a moment where usually connected to heavy socio-political turmoil that generates a lot of instability in the world, and that instability forces the human being to look for answers. Those answers usually are found through magical and mystical means. So when we look back at the 1920s to 1940s, what was it? Well, it was like after World War I and after the Spanish influenza. And so like a lot of people were dead and a lot of people were desperate, trying to rebuild their lives. And then all of a sudden we have the 1929 the Great Depression, which lasted till 1935. So 5 years of people like being broke and going, without meals for days all over the world, all over the Western world, I would say, because we're always talking about a Western perspective, being Westerners. And then, out of a sudden, people were looking for answers, people for solutions, and that's where the magical thinking and the mystical seeking usually comes back and helps. Lo and behold, that's where we are right now again. I would say that we had our Great Depression in 2008. Possibly we're still suffering from it. We went through a Spanish influenza event that was COVID, and now look at we live in a very unstable world. Well, to the likes we haven't seen it for the last 80 years. Which I should also say it's been one of the longest periods in human history of peace and prosperity. So it was bound to come to an end at some point. And now, as you can see, for the last 5 years, 6 years, there's been a resurgence of interest of everything spiritual, magical, of various kinds, right? From those of us who are interested like in magic and mysticism proper, for those who are interested in the UFO, UAP disclosure movements. That's been massive in the last few years. And also a reverberation maybe on more, I would say, public aspect, which is, witch talk or witches of Instagram, all the stuff on social media. But that's it. That's it. What happens? I think that since magic is one of those 4 ways that humans understand and tries to make sense of the world around us, whenever the world stops being rational and stable, whenever an element of chaos is, put into the mix again, that's when the magical comes back banging, I would say. I really hope we won't have to have a World War III, because I would not like it. Then again, maybe looking back at history, historians will say that we've been through World War III for years, but it's just been seen as a war that has not been played on hot battleground, even if, I would argue, Ukraine, Gaza, name it, but the Sahel, there's plenty of hot battlegrounds right now, just not in Europe. Well, Ukraine is in Europe, by the way, and Gaza is on is right there, right? Yeah, it kind of is in Europe as well, right? So we shall see.
One of the things that when I first really began looking at this, I came across, all of us know about the idea of voodoo dolls. We hear the idea of charms and talisman. These are what I understand is in the realm of what you would call sympathetic magic. Can you talk for a moment around, one, what is sympathetic magic? What is it to imbue something with sympathetic magic? And what is it that we hope someone gains from utilizing something imbued with sympathetic magic, such as a talisman or an amulet?
So sympathetic magic really means using magic by virtue of creating something that's similar to something you want to achieve, okay? In the case of a voodoo doll, it's a terrible term. We shouldn't use it really. It doesn't really exist in voodoo, the concept of dolls. It's a much more complex and nuanced than that. But let's look at the idea of creating a fetish with the similarities of somebody that you want to influence, and then doing something to that fetish so that the person that is similar to the fetish will do the same thing, will feel the same things, etc., etc. That is the core idea behind sympathetic magic. Talismanic magic, which also includes charms, is something similar in the sense that you imbue something physical as an anchor for an energy that is able to bring some sort of benefit in your life. Usually, talismanic magic is used in what we call planetary magic, in the sense that the talisman is the anchor for planetary influences that the magician is able to coalesce from the stars and bring them back onto Earth and have that talisman become the anchor of it. For instance, you can create a talisman based on Jupiterian energies if you want prosperity or authority. You can create a talisman bound with Martian energies if you want, win a lawsuit or, silence your foes, things like this, right? there's 7 traditional planets in magic. Of course, 2 are not planets astronomically, with the sun and the moon, but they're considered planets in magical thinking. And each one of those have attributes. And so the idea is that you want to learn how to be able to call those attributes from the stars, which are not exactly the physical stars. It's more like a state of mind, okay, or magic, I should say. And then you're able to bring it down and anchor that into this physical thing that then acts as a repository of that energy. And then by bringing it with you or gifting it to the person you want to influence, that magical connection can do its magic, really.
When we look at what you might call beneficial magic, what would someone practical do, I don't know, on a daily basis, but if they were to engage in something and say, I want to understand a little bit about this, but I also, for example, I have a lot of friends that I've met now that I hang out with hippies. I was quite surprised how many of my friends were Wiccans, and the nature of having an altar, right? I visited a friend's home and she said, I was like, wow, this is a whole host of unique and items here. And she says, look at all of it, Bob, please do. But don't touch, right? What is it in the nature of having an altar and bringing these to that altar?
The idea of the altar is almost like a mega talisman, right? Like imagine like what I just told you, that all these talismans you can create, those becomes anchor receptacles for these planetary energies that you conjure down. Well, an altar is where it's the part in your house that you dedicate to your art, that is your magical art, and you make it sacred without the need for blood or without the need for animal or human sacrifice, just by consecrating it, and then basically you decide that is a place in your house that where only the sacred lives. Okay, this is something that might be seen as a bit strange, a bit weird in more secular traditions, which is most of the Western world has become incredibly secular since World War II, in fact, onwards. But back in Italy, and I would say in more Catholic cultures, you might have in your house, maybe in your garden, a little altar to Mother Mary, right? And that's it. Like it's the same idea. An altar is nothing but a talisman, in the sense that it's something that you created sacred, you deputized it as the receptacle for everything that's sacred in your house. Having it helps keeping things neat. Like, so all your magical, which means all your sacred tools live on the altar. And so there can be like almost like a separation between the sacred and the mundane. Because again, every time we interact with the sacred, we are stepping into something that's not just our day-to-day lives. This is why, for instance, at the retreat in Joshua Tree, one of the facilitator is leading you to a little meditation, so that you detach yourself from everything you've been doing that far, and you enter a sacred space where you listen to me ramble for a while, pretty much.
I've enjoyed the meditations, and it's one, I've meditated for several decades, and I've used guided meditations for several decades, and I find them very useful. And when I began hearing, you begin understanding more about the rituals of the I'm thinking of it. Sorry, there we go. When you think about the rituals that they do, for example, with the Freemasons, right, that what they're doing is they're just orienting someone's consciousness into a specific direction, and then rebuilding how they see the world stage by stage, which is how you reach a 33rd degree Masonry. Obviously you're supposed to go through the stages in order to attain that information and knowledge, but what ideas might we gain from those that the common man and woman of the world don't currently know or believe, right? Like I understand the first ritual in Freemasonry is a rebirth.
So, of course, I'm bound to secrecy, so I cannot tell you exactly everything that happens there. But the way I can, second of all, I can also tell you that with a little Google foo, everybody can find everything they need to know. Might want to know about Freemasonry. Everything has been out in the open on the internet since forever. I mean, and this is the same for even certain orders like Ordo Templarientis that still make a big fuss about keeping their rituals secret. All the rituals were published in 1972, so they've been published in 50 odd years already. The point that I'm trying to make here is that in any initiatory practice, and by that I mean in any practice that gives you an initiation, that gives and that means that sets you on a path separate, sacred, compared to your mundane life, the true secrets are always incommunicable, which means that the true secret of the first degree of Freemasonry, for instance, not so much that it is a rebirth, it is what you experience while you go through to the ceremony. And that is true for every degree of Freemasonry, every grade of the Golden Dawn, or every grade of the AA, or every degree of the OTO, all these various multifaceted organizations that they offer a formal initiation. That is pretty much like, it means that they offer a series of rituals, a series of practices that do align you towards whatever that organization stands for. And in the case of Freemasonry, really is getting good men and making them better, more moral, more ethical. That's it. Like that's so that they can be better gears in the machine of society. Okay. Other organizations will have different aim, but that's the idea always, right? And so the initiation they give you, it's not so much about, the secret words that you are given at each degree, the passwords, the passscripts, the token, is the experience you go through in those rituals, okay? That's why I say like the true secrets are incommunicable, because I cannot tell them, because even if I can tell you all the secret words and show you all the grips and all the tokens, but that's not it. That's something, it's a structure around it. The experience of it is part of this formal initiation that the societies allow. And I call it a formal initiation because being initiated in Freemasonry, even going up to you mentioned the 33rd degree, there's only 3 degrees in Freemasonry. There's the first, the second, and the third. You can call it the Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. Everything else, the other degrees of the York Rite, the other degrees of the Scottish Rite up until the 33rd, those are all corollaries to that. Like most of the times, though, those are all degrees that add to the story, but the true story is what happened in the first 3, okay? And this threefold division, it's also something that reminds us, for instance, of the alchemical transmutation sequence, where you have the nigredo, the putrefaction phase, where you are dissolved. Then you have the albedo, where things starts to come back together. And finally, the final phase is the rubedo, where you're reborn anew. Okay? You can think of the phoenix that dies, goes back in flames, and then comes up again. Always this threefold system. This threefold system from time to time is expanded in a 7-fold system, because we like the number 7 as well. But let's not go there, because we're going to stay here forever. But the idea is that all these various organizations offer a formal way to experience this threefold initiation. I would argue, though, that true initiation, it's something that comes from the individual truly understand what happens to themselves and is eventually able to establish a connection with what in Thelema call the Holy Guardian Angel. And the Holy Guardian Angel is a lofty term that comes directly from a grimoire called the Abramelin grimoire. And in Abramelin has a meaning, and that is sort of like it's an angel of God that is there to guide you. In Thelema, it has a kind of a different meaning, because in Thelema, it's a concept akin to the union with God. So that is the final steps of yoga, that is samadhi, okay? That like the proper union with God. Imagine like true initiation, so is you trying to rise up to the planes of existence, and from the other side, this fire from heaven coming down and meeting you in the middle. In that midpoint, that's where true initiation is enabled, and that is when you achieve the knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. What you find in Freemasonry, what you find in OTO, what you find even in the AA, in the Golden Dawn, name it, those are all formal ways to suggest that way, but you have to each one of us has to find its own way or their own way to get there. I hope I didn't confuse you too much.
No, that was quite excellent. In fact, it was a good segue to another question that I had. One of the more interesting documentaries I've ever watched was called The Afterlife Investigations, based on the Skull Project out of Skull, England, where, you know, the Psychical Research Society had gone in, had done several experiments. They had demonstrated just, you know, incredible phenomenon within their space. How much of what we talk about in magic is accessing energies and entities and things that have always existed and have always been participatory in our world, but we just haven't recognized? And what is that interaction created by? You know, should we be afraid of it?
You're asking this to someone who conjured his first demon at age 18. So no, you should not be afraid of that, because for me, we are here to go, in the sense we're here to go and explore whatever is there, whatever we don't see with our five senses, right? We have to achieve a sixth sense, maybe a seventh sense. We have to move, you know, create our body of light so that it can become a radio receiver and transmitter for whatever we don't see. So I don't think there's any reason to be scared of whatever could be there, right? The reason is that oftentimes people have terrible experiences when they try to establish contact without being prepared for it. The way I like to explain this is that these incarnated intelligences, or as I like to call them even better, these aggregates of consciousness that do not aggregate around a physical body like we do, but they aggregate around other things that we cannot perceive with our physical senses. They also have a much higher frequency, okay? And so it could be dangerous for us to interact with them, whatever they are. Let's not get too much into the taxonomies of it all, just because it would be the same thing as you walking into Chernobyl without a hazmat suit, right? You know, what I'm meaning is that nuclear energy is not bad per se. It's just nuclear energy, okay? We can interact with nuclear energy. In fact, we do. In fact, we do it with great success. With, you know, like it or not, nuclear energy is the safest and the best way to generate energy that we know of today, if we interact with it with proper shielding, proper protocols, and whatnot. This is the same for interacting with everything, with the unseen. Okay, be it angels, demons, genius loci, spirits of places, whatever, right? Aliens. Oftentimes, people have horrible experiences, either because they're unlucky and they, you know, chance upon these experiences without knowing and without being protected by it, or because they're reckless, because they try to, let's summon a demon. Okay, do you understand what a demon is? Do you understand what they want? Do you understand how to interact with them? No, I just, you know, cast a circle and said some names. Yeah, well, sucks to be you. You know what I mean? And in my experience, what we call angels are much worse. Remember that the God of the Bible sent angels to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He didn't send a demon, he sent an angel. So actually 2 angels. So, you know, like oftentimes we tend to think, oh, you know, angels are good guys. I wouldn't be so sure. But again, we have something in us as humans. We have this almost like this innate curiosity and innate ability to contact the unseen. Because again, from the unseen, we can get a lot of information that can be and is very useful to our own existence. But we have to do it via the proper protocols. I mean, this is what I'm trying to teach through my books, to my courses, which are very, very basic level. Because again, like I insist that if you do not start by establishing a very solid foundation, you're gonna like build a house of cards, and then when the first gust of wind come along, boom, you're gone, and the house is gone, and you're gone with it. But if you build solid foundations, then you can use nuclear magic. Nuclear energy, I would have to say. But say.
Yeah, and in many times during the class over the last few days, it's been said, look, if you're going to consider engaging in anything like this, that you should first and foremost do a couple of years of psychotherapy in order to be prepared for this. And this takes us sort of back to what Tucker Carlson said, look, using psychedelics will just conjure the devil or Satan. Well, I mean, listen, I'm a what you would call classically a psychonaut. I use psychedelics several times a year, anywhere from mushrooms to Molly to LSD. I had a transformational experience with DMT. My friends have used ayahuasca. And at each one of these, it could be said that there have been experiences that were transformational. And sometimes they are very challenging, but is it possible that when we say that we're summoning the Satan or devil or evil, that what we're really doing is confronting the shortcomings in our own personal understanding of the world?
I think that can be a psychological reading of this. I think that so let me preface by saying that yes, everybody who engages with either psychonautics or magic or mysticism of any kind, I would say they would greatly benefit from doing some time in therapy first, right? Like make it 6 months, make it 1 year. Therapy is very costly, as we all know, so there's a barrier of entrance there, but it's useful because especially if you can find a very good therapist, which few and far between nowadays, but if you can, you are starting to go into this experience better equipped. Okay, that said, then you should also master more than a modicum of courage, because these practices are meant to shake your foundations, because they want to test if those foundations are solid enough, like we were saying, right? So it could well be that some of the demons and monsters that people see, partly it's because, as I said, they're maybe not prepared for that, most of the times, I'd argue. Partly because from time to time they have to confront the shadow, to use a Jungian term, okay? What I see right now, though, again, with Tucker Carlson, a recent podcast interview, it's more that there's a lot of, there's a lot of like misinformation. There's a wild conflation of unrelated ideas, all put together. There's a lot of sloppy sourcing. In that podcast, there's like the guy, which I think his real name was Conrad Flynn. I don't know. I never seen this guy before, but out of sudden this guy was like, I know Gary Lachman, I know Mitch Horowitz, I know Richard Spence, and I was like, yeah, we know those names, but who are you, and why are you bringing all these people in that make them? I really think that right now, because of the world being very complicated, to say the least, there's a bit of a push to find the next scapegoat, the next scaremongering. Something like we need to keep scaremonger to keep everybody fighting with each other. For a while it's been like, it was like the Muslims, and then it was trans people, and now all of a sudden we're once again the devil worshippers. We're back in the 80s, satanic panic 2.0, 3.0. Yeah. The truth of the matter is that if you accept that these practices are challenging, if you accept that these practices are not for everybody, as humans, we all have a birthright to that. That I mean is that you don't have to be born a king or a queen. You don't have to be born a billionaire to engage with these practices, but you have to be willing to say, you know what, this is the same as me wanting to become an orchestra level piano player or an Olympic marathon runner. Am I going to put that level of effort? Because if I'm just going to half-ass it, it's very likely you're going to get burned. But no, that's not because there's monsters out there waiting for you at every turn, or demons, or Satan, or whatnot. Demons are cool guys. I know a couple of them. So.
You know, one of the things we've talked about a little bit is the nature of psychedelics and such. How do you feel about the use of psychedelics as a tool in ritual magic?
I used them a lot when I was younger. Like you, I experienced pretty much with everything. And at some point, I realized that they were becoming I was almost like losing myself into the experience of the psychedelic for the sake of it, as opposed of using it as a ladder to somewhere else, right? And so in time, I just stopped using them altogether. And instead, I've been focusing on reaching certain stages of, deep trance or stages of consciousness via other means, by ritual means alone. At the same time, I really do think that when properly administered, when properly understood, set and setting, these terms that are used a lot, like when all those things are properly organized, they can be very good stepping stones towards another kind of approach, which is something completely free of any sort of aids of any kind, including the psychedelic. But yeah, again, if you can find good stuff nowadays, it's very hard to.
It is.
At least here in Europe, it's you don't find good stuff anymore. So
I always tell my friends, look, when I go to music festivals, I don't ask for a lot. I just want high quality, good drugs. Fortunately, I know good people and I know good sources, so that helps. As we're
that always helps.
Yeah, exactly. We got about 5 minutes here, if that's okay. And so I do want to address, because I think people will find this very interesting. And one of the things that a YouTube channel anthropologist by the name of Robert SEPEHR did a video on a few years ago was on sex magic and on the Epstein case. And he pointed to the testimony given by some of the victims back in the 2006-2007 case. Now, many of them said what would happen is that during these explicit massages, just as he was about before climaxing, but at climax, he would stop them, and then he would take several phone calls. One, it appears that he required to break a taboo, that he required that his form of sex magic required him to violate and sacrifice something precious, being these young ladies. And then not only that, but to reach a point of high focus. What is that he's performing? Is that just something perhaps medical, that if you get to this high level of focus by doing something bad, you can think a certain way? What is that type of sex magic attempting?
So first of all, I never heard of this, and it's very interesting. I want to look more into that, because what you describe, the rising of the orgasm and then stopping there pretty much without emitting the seed, this is something that it's called in various ways in sexomagical practices. The sleep of Siloam, it's something that comes after this, or energized enthusiasm. The idea is that what is the arousal? Really, it's an energy, right? So the idea is that if you are able to be aroused to a very incredible level, but then being able to exert your will over your own body and then keep the seed inside of you, that point becomes a seed that goes somewhere else. It doesn't go into the world. It doesn't get dispersed into the world. It goes somewhere else. Where it goes? Well, it could be like taking phone calls. Maybe it was going to try and influence other people, right? Could it be? Now, I really want to learn more about this, because it would surprise me if Jeffrey Epstein knew anything about this. But then again, the guy's a millionaire, billionaire. This information has been out in the open for at least 100 years, right? People consider it secret because they don't know where to look for. But let's say if you're a billionaire and you want to get all possible edges on your competitors, maybe at some point you pay someone that tells you, hey, try this, right? But was he connected to sexomagical rituals or orders. I don't know at all, right? But that what you describe is, in fact, energized enthusiasm. Now, the other part you say, like, the idea of sacrificing a woman, in this case, that I would call it a perversion of sex magic, because in sex magic, the idea is that it is love is the law, right? It's love the most important thing. Love is under will in Thelema. That is this love, which is really agape, a love for the cosmos, a love for everybody, is under the constraints of the will, exactly because you want to direct that love to the specific aim, but it has to be love. It cannot be sexual abuse, right? Because that's the opposite of love. So I would say that a lot of these people, maybe, like, I do believe that it's very possible that somebody who's a billionaire eventually tries these practices because they try everything. But there you go. You have a perversion of the message. And that's maybe why he died, possibly in a horrible way. And now we are having to contend with whatever horrible things he's done in his life to this day. Because he took something that was sacred and beautiful and make it horrible. I would say something, because I'm pretty sure somebody in the comments would say, well, this guy is not telling all the truth, because Aleister Crowley was known to abuse some of his lovers and to use sex magical operations with prostitutes. But as I said before, he was also very honest in recording all his operations. And we know that the vast majority of his operations that were done with prostitutes failed because there was no love there. So, it's something that to be taken in consideration, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, Marco, this has been a fascinating hour. I'll give you the last 2 or 3 minutes. Is there anything else you want to share with us that we haven't talked about, or any last words or thoughts?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think we covered a lot, right? So thank you so much for inviting me. Of course, I'll see you again. From this side of the Zoom call, but yeah, at the retreat. And thank you for having me. That's it.
Thank you very much for being a guest on the Dr. Stinky McDougall podcast. Thank you, everybody. Do hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Leave us a comment down below, because it's a fascinating subject. And if we not only ignore it, but if we deny its importance and its purpose and use in the world today, then we deny ourselves understanding the world that we live in. And the reason, once again, why I'm at this conference is that this is a technology, and I desire to understand the technology. Thank you, everybody, and peace out.